Greatest of the greatest of the greatest of the greatest Akokites. It really is a pleasure to join the Vice Chancellor and the Director of the Learning Institute to welcome you all to this very important colloquium on reimagining the open distance learning ecosystems, technology, policy, and institutional priorities. The Distance Learning Institute has the distinction, as we've heard repeatedly, of being the oldest of its kind in Nigeria. That history is important, but perhaps more important is the responsibility that comes with it. Institutions that pioneered yesterday must also be prepared to lead today and indeed tomorrow. And there's perhaps a very simple reason why this particular conversation is urgent. The mathematics of access to university education in Nigeria simply does not work if we continue to rely on mainly our conventional campus model for university education. Today, more than 2.2 million young Nigerians seek admission through JAM annually. Yet, historically, our entire tertiary system has admitted only about 35% of that number every year. And even more striking is where the demand is concentrated. In recent years, the overwhelming majority of applicants have chosen universities rather than polytechnics or colleges of education. Now look 10 years ahead. By 2036, Nigeria's population is projected to be something close to 250 million. We're growing at roughly about 5 million people every year. That's about the size of Liberia every year. If demand for higher education simply rises at the same rate as population, we'll be looking at close to 2.7 million applicants every year. And if secondary school completion improves, as we certainly hope it will, the number could easily exceed 3 million annual applicants. So the question is very practical. Where will we put these people? We can't possibly build enough lecture theaters, hostels, laboratories, physical campuses using the traditional campus method alone. To meet that scale of demand, we simply have to do something else. This is why open and distance learning can no longer be seen as something on the margins of higher education. It is now clearly a national necessity. And for many years, distance learning was mainly about overcoming geography. How do we reach the student who can come physically to a university campus? The working mother, the civil servant that lives hundreds of kilometers away, or the professional who can't leave work, or the young person who simply can't afford to relocate. All that remains important, but the challenge today is much bigger. We now have to ask, how do we educate millions more Nigerians without having to build more physical university spaces? And that is where technology, and especially artificial intelligence, changes the equation. Until recently, one of the weaknesses of mass distance education was that scale often came at the expense of personal attention. A lecturer could teach thousands of students online, but could not personally tutor thousands of students. AI potentially changes all that. Imagine 50,000 students enrolled in a program, but each one having access 24 hours a day to an AI tutor that can explain difficult concepts again and again, test understanding, translate material, provide feedback, and adapt learnings to the learner's own pace. Suddenly, we may be able to combine mass access with personalized learning. And that is very important, especially for a country such as ours. But it also means that we must stop thinking of innovation as simply taking the old university and putting it online. If all we do is take a 2-hour lecture, put it on Zoom, upload a PDF, and call that transformation, we simply have changed the medium, but we haven't changed the model. The real opportunity is to rethink the entire learning experience. What should students learn now? How should they learn it? How should we assess students? How can they acquire qualifications in smaller stages over time? How do we make learning available throughout a person's working life? AI and other technologies are changing very quickly. Law, accounting, banking, medicine, engineering, and other professions. Millions of people already in the workforce will also need to return repeatedly to education to acquire new skills. So the future of distance learning is not only about young people trying to enter university for the first time. It's also about the 40-year-old, the 50-year-old, and older, and the professional whose job is changing right beneath their feet. And this brings us directly to the 3 issues in today's theme: technology, policy, and institutional priorities. How do we adapt learning with AI and digital technologies to local realities? And as we've heard already from the Vice Chancellor and from the Director of the DLI, how do we adapt to the realities of power supply, such as we have limited bandwidth and the very high cost of devices for most people? How do we ensure that our systems work on mobile phones, even offline? How should AI be used in teaching and assessment? How will lecturers be supported to design better digital courses and use AI effectively and ethically as well? Also, methods of assessment must change. If AI can now write a good essay in seconds, we must ask exactly what we are testing when we ask students to submit essays. But through all of this, one principle must remain clear. The purpose of education is not technology. The purpose of education is human development. Technology is valuable only if it expands human capability and opportunity. And that is ultimately the great promise, in my view, of open distance learning. It can say to the person who cannot relocate, the worker who cannot stop earning, the person living with a disability, or the professional who needs new skills, and crucially, to the millions of young Nigerians for whom there simply may be no physical seat in a conventional university. They say to all of this, quality education is still available to you. And that is why this conversation today matters. This institution, the DLI, that pioneered distance learning in Nigeria, now has an opportunity to help pioneer its next generation. Our questions today should therefore be practical and ambitious. What should Nigeria's open distance learning ecosystem look like 10 years from now? How many more Nigerians can we educate? What technologies do we need? What policies must change? How should we learn, or how should we train lecturers? How should assessments evolve? And how can AI help us achieve something that the traditional model alone simply cannot achieve? High-quality university education at the scale of Nigeria's future population. That, in my view, is the central challenge before us. And if we get it right, distance learning will no longer be regarded as an alternative to formal university learning. It will be the principal way in which Nigeria fulfills the promise of university education for millions of its people. And there are many questions today, many questions as we've heard already, many issues to resolve. But I think we're fortunate indeed to have the benefit of the expertise and experience of Emeritus Professor Stephen Brown, our keynote speaker, who, as you know, is perhaps one of the foremost global experts in the fields of technology-enhanced learning, online education, and distance learning. I don't think we could have a more appropriate person to help us frame our conversations today. And thank you, Professor, for making the time to come today. I look forward to a very rich and practical conversation today. Thank you very much, everyone.